Good evening, class. My name is Nadia Chavez, and my teaching today is going to be on the Abrahamic versus Mosaic covenant. So while I sat and I thought, how am I going to be teaching today, I came across a page on Bible.org named God Can Use Us All. So I found a passage and it says, sometimes do you ever wonder why God called you to do something for him? There are many reasons why God shouldn't have called you or me or anyone else for that matter. But God doesn't wait until we are perfect to call us. Think of all those God used. You're in good company if you think you aren't ready for God to use. Here are a few items mentioned about Abraham and Moses in that article. Abraham lied. Moses stuttered. Abraham was too old. Paul was a murderer, and so was Moses. Did I mention Moses had a short fuse, and so did Peter, Paul, and lots of other folks? So the passage continued on. God doesn't hire and fire like most bosses because he's more like our dad than a boss. He doesn't look at financial gain or loss. He's not prejudiced or partial, nor sassy and brassy, nor deaf to our cry. He's not blind to our faults. His gifts to us are free. We could do wonderful things for others and still not be wonderful ourselves. Satan says, you are not worthy. And Jesus says, so what? I am. Satan looks back and sees our mistakes. God looks back and sees the cross. So now let's take a look at the covenants that the Lord bestowed upon Moses and Abraham. I'm going to first start with the Abrahamic covenant. In this covenant the Lord entered with Abram. We know that the Lord made 3 promises to him. First, he gave him the promise of land in chapter 12, verse 1 in Genesis, the promise of seed in verse 2, and the promise of a blessing in verse 3. So I'm going to begin by reading Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 7. The Lord had said to Abram, leave your country to your people and your father's household and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation and I will bless you. I will make your name great and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So Abraham left as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abram traveled through the land as far as the side of the great tree of Moreh and Shechem. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who appeared to him. Abram was given a call by the Lord, and Abram would follow what he was commanded to do. We must focus on the fact that the Lord did not make this a conditional covenant. He didn't use any words of doubt when it came to Abram. Abram was promised that in return he would be made into a great nation and the Lord would bless him. That was in chapter 12, verse 2. God started to fulfill this promise when he gave Abram and Sarah a son named Isaac. The nation of Israel is that great nation descended from Abram, Isaac, and Jacob. Then the Lord promises that Abram's name will be great, and again he will be blessed by the Lord in verse 2. Then the Lord promises to Abram that he will bless those who bless Abram, and in the same retrospect, curse those who curse him. That was in verse 3. Abram is truly a blessed man. God blessed Abram with livestock, silver, and gold. And finally, the Lord told him that all the people on earth would be blessed through him. After these promises were bestowed upon Abram, he did as he was told by the Lord. He took Sarah and his nephew Lot and went to the land of Canaan. And at that time, God made another promise to Abram that he would give the land to his offspring. There, Abram built an altar for the Lord to give him his offerings. One author said, it is important to see that God made a promise to Abram about the land before God confirmed the promise with his covenant, which was in Genesis chapter 15. The Lord made promises to Abram. In return, the Lord told Abram he would be blessed. We see numerous times in Genesis 12, verses 1 through 7, that the Lord repeats that he will bless Abram. So we're going to read a few verses now in chapter 15. We're going to start with verses 1 through 8 and then 12 through 16. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your very great reward. But Abram said, O sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him, This man will not be your heir, but a son coming from your own body will be your heir. He took him outside and said, Look up to the heavens and count the stars. If indeed you can count them, then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. So going to verse 12, it says, As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. And the Lord said to him, Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the fourth generation your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. So in Genesis chapter 15, we start to see the confirmation of Abraham's covenant. The Lord reaffirmed to Abram that he is the shield of Abram. The Lord then promises him a son to be his heir, since he was concerned that he didn't have a child to inherit his estate. Finally, Abram was told by the Lord to count the stars, which would be the number of his offspring. Abram believed and credited to him as righteousness in verse 6. Abram truly believed the word of the Lord and gave confirmation to the Lord that his word would surely come to be. God once again made a promise to him that he would gain possession of land, and he followed by asking God, How can I know that I will gain possession of it? In verse 8. In verse 12 of chapter 15, Abram falls into a deep sleep, and the Lord spoke to him. The Lord confirmed to him that his descendants will be strangers, enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. And he promised to punish those that will enslave the descendants, and promised that they will have great possessions. The Lord closes chapter 15 with a promise to Abram. To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the river of the Euphrates. So in these chapters, Abram has questioned the Lord, and the Lord reassures him through his actions. The covenant with Abram was only for him and his descendants. The Lord knew that he would be a father to many. When the Lord makes a covenant, it is made directly and without doubt. He never doubted the Lord's covenant to him and stood committed to the Lord and what he was supposed to do on his behalf. The covenant that the Lord made with Abram was unconditional and confirmed by later actions. The Lord has made a covenant with his descendants that will inherit the land as stated in Genesis 15, verses 18 to 21. The image that I'm going to show you is from Dr. O's Pentateuch class that I took, and I really wanted to show it because it does show Abraham's descendants and how he was truly blessed by the Lord. I apologize that I don't have another monitor to show this to you, but you'll see the breakdown of all of Abraham's descendants here. So next I'm going to go into the Mosaic covenant. In the book of Exodus, the Lord entered into a covenant with the land of Israel through Moses. And the covenant, of course, includes the Lord's commandments, the judgments, and the ordinances. Unlike the Abrahamic covenant, though, this covenant the Lord made was conditional. So I'm going to open up by reading Exodus chapter 20, verse 1 through 6, and then 18 to 26. And God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to those generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. So moving on to verse 18 through 26. When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain smoke, they trembled in fear. They stayed at a distance, and they said to Moses, Speak to us yourself, and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us, or we will die. Moses said to the people, Do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. The people remained at a distance, and Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. Then the Lord said to Moses, Tell the Israelites this, You have seen for yourselves that I have spoken to you from heaven. Do not make any gods to be alongside me. Do not make for yourself gods of silver or gods of gold. Make an altar of earth for me, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, your sheep and goats and your cattle. Wherever I cause my name to be honored, I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stones for me, do not build it with dressed stones, for you will defile it if you use tool on it. And do not go up to my altar on steps, lest your nakedness be exposed on it. We know that the Ten Commandments makes up part of the covenant, like I mentioned before, and it's the foundation, but they're not the entirety of the covenant. We see in chapter 20 that the people of Israel were left trembling in fear because they didn't want God to speak with them again. That was in verse 18 and 19. Moses knew that the Lord was testing the people of Israel, and he would be the one to have to communicate with God. In Exodus 24, the covenant was confirmed. Moses went up to approach the Lord alone. He shared the word and the laws from the Lord, and the people responded by saying, "Everything the Lord has said, we will do," in chapter 24, verse 3. Moses then wrote everything that the Lord spoke to him. He prepared an altar and prepared a sacrifice. One author stated, "This covenant between God and the people of Israel was temporary. God promised a day when he would make a new covenant, not only with Israel, but with all mankind." So when we compare the Abrahamic and Mosaic covenant, we know that there are two of the biggest covenants in the Old Testament. The Abrahamic covenant was an unconditional covenant promising Abraham land, seed, and blessing. The Mosaic covenant was a renewal of the Abrahamic covenant, but with conditions. So beginning in Exodus 19, verse 4, the Lord tells the people of Israel that if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. So we will know if they obey, they would be blessed by the Lord. And to reverse the statement around, we know that if they didn't obey, they would not be blessed by the Lord. Thus, this was a conditional covenant, unlike the Abrahamic covenant. The Lord simply gave Abram the covenant. He wasn't required to do anything specific for the Lord. Abram's promise allowed him to make a great nation, but with Moses, the people of Israel had to comply with the covenant in order to receive their blessing from the Lord. The Lord first made a covenant with Abram in the book of Genesis, whose name later changed to Abraham. With Abraham, God narrows his plan for the world to a specific family. The plan will lead to a blessing for all people through Abraham. That's in Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3. God is often referred to as the God of Abraham, and the promise to Abraham in Genesis 12 and its reiterations in Genesis 15 and Genesis 17 provide the basis for understanding circumcision, the promised land, the work of Christ, and the faith in the gospel. So in the book of Exodus, Moses also had a pivotal role with the Lord. He was a mediator between God and Israel at Mount Sinai. The name Moses means is born, or he who is drawn from water. We know that the Lord had an important job for Moses. Since his birth, Moses had a relationship with the Lord that many others never had. Moses was a law enforcer, a peacemaker, and his name is his mission. Even with the flaws of these men that I spoke about and the flaws that I mentioned at the beginning, the Lord chose these two men to create these covenants with. The Lord looks past any flaws, and he truly knew what these men were capable of. Surely we may need to be reminded of the rules along the way, but the Lord knows your ability and knows who is worthy. Thank you.